Bryn Mawr College is one of the few remaining women's-only colleges in the country, and I bring that up in the context of the story that we're about to read, because you would think that these colleges would have some sort of self-preservation mechanism or survival mechanism where at some point they would start to make changes to ensure their financial viability. Listen, there's a guy in higher education, his name is Clay Christensen. He wrote a book called The Innovative University about 10 years ago in which he predicted that half of the colleges in the United States would basically close due to financial inviability over the next 10 to 15 years. He wrote that book 10 years ago, and now you throw COVID on top of it, and it's a whole other problem. And for women's only colleges, this has been actually a very specific problem. In fact, colleges have closed over this. Sweetbriar College, which is a women's only college, closed about 5 years ago, I believe it was. A lot of women's only colleges have had to go co-ed just to stay financially viable. And you would think that the leadership at places like Bryn Mawr would watch what's happening in their landscape, because in the world of higher education, this is a very, very known issue. I have worked with countless executive teams, cabinets, boards around creating plans for the long-term financial viability of different types of colleges out there. But Bryn Mawr has clearly not gotten the memo, because they are allowing the students to take over and rule the roost. According to this article in Quillette, a student mob took over Bryn Mawr. The college said thank you. This is basically like Evergreen State College Part 2. I hope they have a Benjamin Boyce on campus that's going to be documenting all of what is going on and share it with all of us. But in the meantime, we're going to read this article. We're going to find out what's going on at Bryn Mawr's campus. But before we get into that, listen, folks, I took a couple days off. I took a couple days off. I had like 3 days off. It's the first time that I haven't worked for 3 straight days since June. Actually, it's the first time I haven't worked 1 straight day since June, let alone 3. It was like an extra little vacation. But I'm back in business now, and I'm going to be doing my daily content around news, politics, culture, a lot focusing on the social justice woke takeover of our country. If you enjoy the videos I've been putting together, I would appreciate your subscription to the channel today. Just click the little subscribe button down below. If you've already done that, make sure you've turned on your notifications, you give the video a thumbs up, you leave a comment to feed that algorithm. It all really helps me out. It helps me maintain this as a financially viable way to spend my time, and it allows me to free up my other time to be able to make content for you guys, which I really, really do enjoy. All right, let's get into the topic. But before we get into it, we're going to do the very first thing I do every single time I do a story about a university, and we're going to remind ourselves how much it costs for a student to attend Bryn Mawr for 1 single year. Okay, so this is their undergraduate tuition rate. Tuition by itself, $53,000. Room and board, $17,000. College fees, etc., etc. Oh, they don't even do you the courtesy of giving you a total number. But I think we can do some pretty simple math. I don't even need to draw the boxes or do whatever new math thing is required. And we can say that a year at Bryn Mawr is going to cost someone upwards of $70,000. Let's let that sink in for a second. $70,000. Oh my. And what are those students doing with their money? Well, apparently they're with their parents' money, I should say. Apparently they're forming little cancel mobs, because this is what we teach students to do now. Let's read this article from Quillette. Last week marked the end of a chaotic semester at Bryn Mawr College, a small women's liberal arts college located outside Philadelphia. During the final weeks, Bryn Mawr students, including my own child, oh, how fun for the author of this article, scrambled to pick up the pieces following a student strike that exacerbated a serious pre-existing disruption associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. For a period of 3 weeks, regular classes were held, activities were suspended, and student life, such as it was, became marked by the same toxic spirit of racism that strikers claimed to oppose. So I want to show you another thing about Bryn Mawr's website that I noticed even before I read this article. So usually I have to poke around a little bit to find the tuition and fees. Really, colleges are really trying to bury it. There was a movement around 10-15 years ago when I worked in higher education that you wanted to put everything as high level as you possibly could. You wanted to make all this information easily accessible to students. Now colleges are burying it like 7 layers deep. But in poking around to try to find their tuition and fees, I came to the About page. And what did I notice in the About menu? Oh, along with history of the college, mission, president's office, and news, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. Oh, what could possibly go wrong, Bryn Mawr? And basically they have a placeholder page here for their equity, inclusion, and anti-racism initiatives where they are documenting progress and different commitments made. So I'm gonna bet that what we're about to read about at Bryn Mawr is going to be documented and backed up by the reports on this page, in which they're doing progress reports, essentially, out to the community about how they're becoming a more anti-racist institution. Let's keep going. Bryn Mawr is affiliated with nearby Haverford College, whose parallel meltdown in November was documented recently by Quillette. The two selective and well-funded schools are a part of a so-called bi-co arrangement, which allows students to participate in joint classes and activities. Both share summarily progressive commitment to such causes as diversity, equity, and inclusion, and students at both schools are generally well steeped in doctrines of intersectionality, white fragility, anti-racism, and all the rest. Yet following the police shooting of Walter Wallace Jr. in Philadelphia, activists at Haverford and Bryn Mawr embraced the dubious claim that their extremely progressive campuses were actually contaminated by the dangerous climate of racism that quite literally threatened the survival of Black students. In many cases, the ire was directed not only at administrators and non-ideologically compliant faculty, but also at any student suspected of not supporting the strikers' apocalyptic rhetoric, dramatic postures, and inflated demands. Anyone who sought to attend class, go to the dining hall, or even turn in schoolwork was denounced as a scab and often faced acts of bullying. And it's at this point where a responsible university would step in and put a stop to this nonsense right off the bat. But did Bryn Mawr do that? No, apparently they didn't. Apparently they went along with it completely. As the parent of a Bryn Mawr student and the parent of a Bryn Mawr alumni, I found this profoundly unsettling. I kept expecting that at some point the administration would take decisive steps to restore order on campus, where, as at Haverford, in-person learning was supposed to be occurring under COVID-19 testing and social distancing protocols. But that never happened. Instead, a small group of largely unidentified students effectively shut down the campus, not because their views attracted majority support. Only about a quarter of the student body really seemed to be on board from what I can tell, but because the administration simply never pushed back. And this brings us to our first lesson in this article, which is you never bend the knee to these people. You never ever do it, particularly when you're in a position of authority. Like, dude, what are the administrators at Bryn Mawr thinking? They are the adults. They are the ones in charge. And parents like this are literally paying $70,000 a year for their students to go to this college to learn, not to be forced to not go to class and not turn in their schoolwork because a small percentage of the student body, sounds like 25% at absolute most, decided to go on strike. I am not naive about the ideological climate on campuses, having read similar meltdowns at institutions such as Evergreen State College in Washington. But now it was happening at my daughter's school, and the same electronic video conferencing tools that allowed remote students to participate in college life gave me a front row seat on the disintegration of Bryn Mawr's civil society. I saw strike organizers publicly mocking and berating white students based on the color of their skin, followed by cringe-worthy scenes of university officials desperately seeking to appease those same organizers. And this is another part of the problem right here. This is why you need to speak up. I try to explain this to people all the time. just because you think that this nonsense is not affecting you right now doesn't mean it's not going to affect you at some point. All of those people who watched Evergreen State College, what was that, back in like 2017 or something, didn't say books. They were like, oh, that's that small little hippie school in Washington. It's never going to come to my school. Well, guess what? Now it is. And where are you? You haven't spoken up, you haven't fought back, and now all of a sudden it's coming into your backyard and taking your $70,000 of tuition with it when your students should be learning in school rather than protesting about something that is absolutely ridiculous and not even grounded in reality. This is a feminist women's college, where one might think that administrators would be educated about the need to reject coercion, intimidation, and brute force as negotiating tactics. No, they don't, because this is all about power. That is all this is. This is not about creating a more fair, just world. This is not about creating more equal society. This is not about equity. This is about retaining power and forcing your will onto other people. That is what it is. Yet here they are, apologizing to their tormentors. Having been married to an abusive husband, I'm sadly familiar with the temptation to justify one's own abuse by insisting that the problem must be me. I never thought I'd see the same attitude exhibited by the women charged with educating my daughter. The Bryn Mawr student strike, which formally began on October 28th, was led by something called the Bryn Mawr Strike Collective, BMSC, whose grandiosely stated goal was to dismantle systemic oppression in the Bryn Mawr community. How much do you want to bet that they never actually defined what it meant to dismantle systemic oppression and what that oppression was and where it was coming from and what they were going to replace it with? How much do you want to bet? I'm gonna bet all the money in my wallet, which may or may not be a significant amount. Who knows? But the apparently crippling regime of institutional racism, silencing, and instances of white supremacy. Oh, so they did define it as something that's equally as obtuse as the original statement. Got it. Okay. Its list of demands were voluminous. Ooh, what a great word. And included a new required course on blackness and white privilege, additional funding for the campus Black Cultural Center, a call for a halt to the college's unspecified acts of violence against disabled students, acknowledgement of the unseen labor of Black women and Black trans non-binary people on campus, as well as grade protection and money for the work, the emotional labor, if you will, that strikers were claiming to do to fight racism. And we got a sign right here. Are you teaching the white man science? Decolonize step. This is a women's only college. This is literally a women's only college. On November 6th, a week later, Bryn Mawr President Kim Cassidy responded with a proposed timeline for consideration and compliance. Like Wendy Raymond, her presidential counterpart at Haverford, both schools founded by Quakers, and which at least normally retains the Quaker commitment to consensual deliberation, Cassidy believed that the strike might be constructively addressed through town hall-like discussions conducted in the climate of mutual respect. But strike organizers said they were offended by the offer to talk. They're offended by an offer to have a conversation. Conversations never solve anything, God. Claiming they hadn't been given enough time to prepare and refused to attend. So they didn't know what their own demands were. Essentially is what they just told us. They didn't know what their own demands were, and so they were not prepared to sit down and have a conversation with the president of the college, who, let's just be honest, did more than she should have when she offered a conversation in the first place. Instead, they focused on organizing a sit-in that was streamed on Zoom, and you can watch the sit-in right here if you want to put your time to that. I will link all of this per usual in the description below. 2 days later, President Cassidy attempted to remind everyone the real educational credentials were on the line. During this brief period, she demonstrated a modicum of courage. Her statement called for students to return to classes on Monday, November 9th. Education is our mission and our reason to exist. The college made a legal and moral contract with its students and their families to offer classes. We have an obligation to honor this contract. In doing so, we also recognize the significant financial sacrifices that students and families make for this education. Let's just remind ourselves. $70,000 a year! We do not offer opportunities for when we do not offer opportunities for classes, it creates substantial dangers or risks for some, including international students whose student visas require that they attend class, and U.S. students receiving federal and state-funded grants and loans. Students cannot receive federal government aid, Pell Grants, and many loans unless we are accredited, and our accreditation by the Middle States Commission requires that we are actively offer classes and a coherent learning experience towards a degree. Many students, even while indicating support for the goal of a strike, are expressing that they need to return to class. In light of the serious consequences and without wavering from our commitment to continue addressing the strike's demands, the teaching of classes will resume on Monday in cases where classes have not been ongoing. Following on numerous reports of abusive behavior targeting students seeking to return to class, moreover, President Cassidy sent another email for which, incredibly, she later apologized, but I'm getting ahead of myself, calling for a halt to these tactics. Whatever the important goals of the strike and the demands, the college cannot countenance shaming, harassment, and intimidation of students and faculty to achieve them. The college cannot and will not tolerate a climate of fear where, amongst other examples, students are afraid to eat in the dining hall for fear of humiliation or for being seen as racist. The acts of intimidation that I am witnessing and that many students and faculty have described violate the school's core principles. Students have a right to their education. Well, not only do they have a right to it, they've paid $70,000 for it. I just keep coming back to that because it's important. This is not something that colleges are giving out of the goodness of their hearts. People are paying to be there. They're paying to take classes. They are paying to learn the subject matter. And this is the nonsense that they focus on instead. The acts of intimidation that I am witnessing and that many students and faculty have described violate the school's core principles. Students have a right to their education and should not have to endure shaming to attend class. Faculty have a contractual obligation to offer the classes and to provide students the curriculum that was promised. It is unacceptable for faculty to be targeted for public ridicule for doing so. This proved to be the high watermark for Cassidy. Regardless of her directives, many professors still refused to offer regular classes, some out of solidarity with the strike organizers, while others simply wanted to avoid being targeted. Well, dude, this is a good opportunity to fire them. Listen, you can find, especially in this environment where you're offering your classes online anyway, I guarantee you it would not be hard to find people to teach these classes. If faculty members are not willing to do their jobs and step up to the plate and teach the damn classes that they're being paid to teach, then fire them. Bring in someone else. There are databases of adjuncts out there who are dying for work because being an adjunct college professor does not pay that very much money, and it's actually pretty hard to get those gigs because there's so much competition for them. Like, I would never go back to adjuncting myself. Like, people can have that. I have no desire to do it, but there are a lot of people who want to. It would be very easy to replace these teachers. This is not hard. You fire the teachers who are not doing their job. You bring in teachers who are willing to do it. And some of the professors who did hold classes taught only strike-approved content. Are you kidding me? Discussions about racism and white supremacy. The strike teach-ins, meanwhile, typically consisted of videos with titles such as History of Queer Solidarity Against White Supremacy. The strikers who urged that these materials be accorded academic credit took careful note of who was consuming this or that media so as to gauge which students and professors were supporting the strike and which weren't. So they're making their lists, is what they're saying. School officials who interacted with students, such as Dean Jennifer Walters, who was pressured into speaking at the November 9th sit-in event when strike organizers spotted her walking her dog, were crudely mocked. She was mocked for walking her dog instead of coming to their little sit-in. By this time, it had become clear that what the strikers wanted wasn't actual dialogue, you think, but a series of melodramatic vignettes that showcased their claim to moral leadership. This included a November 13th town hall meeting where they controlled the agenda while attending anonymously so as to protect their identities. Attendees learned that the strikers' list of demands was now 23 pages long from the original 5. Indeed, it took the organizers an hour just to read them out. They'd also upsized their original demands, quadrupling the price tag for the aforementioned cultural center, for instance. It was clear that the cost of all this would be picked up by parents. Parents who are already paying, say it with me, $70,000 a year. As at Haverford, administrators had by this time stopped even pretending to offer principled resistance and were now focusing on protecting their careers. At the end of the meeting, Cassidy, along with Provost Tim Hart and Dean Walters, had agreed that they would step down if the demands hadn't been met to the strikers' satisfaction. These people learned nothing. They learned nothing. Dude, Evergreen State College was a big deal in the world of higher education. Every single one of these people knew what happened. Every single one of these people knew what happened at Yale. Every single one of these people knows when this stuff happens, and yet they learn nothing. In what perhaps stands out as her most craven act, Cassidy also agreed to issue an apology for her above-quoted email decrying intimidation and bullying on campus on the absurd basis that my words suggested that this is a problem on campus that originates with strike supporters. It was wrong to convey this message and perpetuate a harmful stereotype. As November wore on, the strikers' militant communiques took on oddly bureaucratic aspect, with Cassidy's detailed announcements regarding her intention to fulfill the strike demands, eliciting an eye-glazing 14-page BMSC critique. In online meetings, students who expressed their frustrations with the strike were told they'd be kicked out of web forums if such behavior continued. The strikers told students that the BMSC and the BMSC alone represented the consensus. They alone are the ones in power to negotiate with the president, and instructed everyone to attend teach-in events where they would be lectured on why we can't have a community discussion on whether we should protest or not. While the administration was pleading for dialogue, these students were insisting that any diversity in viewpoint was a mask for white supremacy. And here they actually have the Zoom chat where they are actually talking about this. This person saying, Luna is being blatantly disrespectful. When you are infringing on my rights, it is no longer a difference of opinion. From Haverford student, we're treating Luna like they brought a negative ass energy into the chat and she is getting checked. Apparently Luna spoke up against this nonsense. And the BME student said to everyone, come to the teach-in tonight on the revolution. We will not reach consensus. It will be an intro on the issue of consensus and why we can't have a community discussion on whether we should protest or not. On November 21st, parents received an email from Kim Cassidy indicating the strike was over. Like her counterpart at Haverford, she sought to convince everyone the ordeal had been a win-win, having forced the entire community to face our history in new ways, to confront persistent institutional barriers to progress, and commit to change. As for the strike collective, it issued yet another lengthy, pretentious manifesto called On Normalcy. The authors actually called the self-congratulatory 15-pager a tryst on as if it were a historic document being nailed to the door of a Wittenberg church. The strikers also unveiled an even grander new name for their organization, the Black Student Liberatory Coalition, and invited students and faculty to continue to disrupt the effing order. Cassidy, whose academic expertise usefully centers on developmental psychology, the president's a developmental psychologist. Okay. Naturally praised On Normalcy as a powerful reflection on their actions, the outcomes of that collective effort, and their ongoing commitment to the work of change, invited everyone in the college community to read it. I have written this piece under a pseudonym. though my identity is known to Quillette editors, as I have no wish for my daughter, who, being like-minded, intends to transfer to another college, smart girl, to suffer from my expressed opinions like her fellow students. She's been left to navigate a strange new landscape, one in which everyone has been put on notice that the school is now controlled, not by its nominal administrators, but by a self-appointed militant student clique. And it goes on a little bit more, but this video's gone on long enough already. I mean, listen, I'm going to link this in the description below. If you want to go and read the rest of it for yourself, you can see some more of the images that are on display here. But here's what I want to say. Like, this is going to keep happening. This is not a surprise that it happened. It's not a surprise that it happened at Bryn Mawr. This is going to keep happening until higher education is essentially defunded, until they have their federal funds taken away. This crap is going to keep happening because they have no reason to change. They don't. Parents are still going to pay that $70,000 tuition. People are still feeding into this nonsense, and they're clearly not learning anything because this has been going on for years now. This is not even new. When did this Yale stuff happen? When did the Evergreen State College stuff happen? That happened years ago. And it's exactly the same thing, and it's going to keep happening over and over and over again until maybe someday, somewhere, a college president, like at the University of Chicago, I believe it was the University of Chicago, wasn't it, who actually stood up to their students and said, no, 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 we're not going to do this crap with you. Until that happens on a more wide basis, we can just anticipate seeing this happen over and over and over again. And every time it does, I'm happy to talk about it on the channel. All right, guys, that's all I have for right now. I'll see you soon.